So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Orchestra's webinar. And this topic today is a discussion on strategies to increase supply chain efficiencies and drive down costs. I'm super delighted to introduce our three panelists. We've got Mike Crozer. Mike is the managing principal and founder of Supply Chain Alliance, a leading Canadian boutique consulting company focused exclusively on supply chain management. And Mike has built out a reputation of trust and knowledge over 40 years in North America and has guided many, many companies to improve their supply chains in various sectors in the North American marketplace. Our second panelist is Nick Sierson, who is the president and CEO of Sierson Enterprises, and brings 40 years of executive and consulting experience, also across diverse industries. Nick has successfully built a career in a number of marquee consulting companies, including A.T. Kearney, KPMG, and Bearing Point. Our third panelist is Anders Nordahl. Anders has not quite 40 years, he's got 30 years of experience in supply chain in a number of big global logistics companies, including Kühne+Nagel, DB Schenker. And he has recently also joined a small startup called Mixed Move and is working with me at Orchestra, where he's the head of supply chain solutions and engages with a lot of customers on behalf of Orchestra to deliver really excellent solutions. I'm your host, Heiner Merman, and I'm super excited to host this webinar and get into it. So let's start with the first question. How do we improve supply chain visibility and how do we improve cost? Maybe getting a bit more concrete is what is supply chain visibility? And Anders, maybe you can start with this.
Yeah, I mean, we can start, of course, with the basics, right? So the basic is data, and data. You don't get visibility out of nothing. All the participants that you have in your supply chain needs to be able to communicate in a digital way, in a structured digital way. And whilst we do have capabilities to make certain things out of external connections, if you don't work digital and if you don't work with providers that can provide data, it's very difficult to create that supply chain visibility. And we can talk about the costing later on, but these are the absolute fundamentals. So working with reputable partners that
What about Nick? You've dealt with this topic about supply chain visibility for many years, right? And what's your perspective? And what's this simple definition of it?
In my mind, issue number one is actually defining the service promise. The chance you cannot meet an expectation that has not been articulated, has not been agreed. So defining the service promise and then measuring how you're performing against the service promise and what expenses you're incurring, and are those the right costs that you're incurring to ensure you're meeting your service promise. So it's very much about understanding what it is you're trying to do and then gathering the data that will allow you to report against it. Are we getting on time? Are we getting in full? How much is it costing? Is that the right cost? Are we working through the right partners? Are we doing the right things? And are we doing things that will allow us to achieve our strategic objectives, which may force us to cost too much? The idea that comes to mind is Amazon's same-day delivery. Still baffles me. It's hugely expensive, and I'm not sure that I see the value, but they do, and they believe in it. So for them, the right cost is something that I would think is a heresy.
So Nick, your perspective is really defining what you want to achieve, measure this, and this is for you the definition of visibility. So understanding how you're doing compared to your service promise.
That's where it starts. Taking it down a level, there's probably two main aspects, and one is being able to track the progress of every transaction and making sure that it's on schedule so that you have a chance to get there on time and in full. And if it's not, making sure you're warning the right people so that they can intervene if they make sense. So, in
Mm,
some of the examples that we've worked together, lifting something out of the maritime stream and putting it on the air stream to get it there faster because it's selling faster than it should or it got delayed. And on the other hand, if something is not selling as well as it should, let somebody else have that container slot on the ship and the other stuff will come in due course.
Mm.
And being able to generate the costs so that you can pre-invoice and you have the visibility of the expense so that you can start doing cost to serve analysis. Things that'll tell you, am I accumulating cost by customer? Am I accumulating channel? Am I accumulating by supplier? Am I accumulating by carrier? Am I accumulating by itinerary? So that you can then go back in and look at the predictability of lead times, the sticking to their service promise in terms of lead times, and accumulating the costs so that you're not paying too much and you
mm.
understand all of the little add-ons and the accessorials, which can be baffling.
Mike, what are your thoughts in this regard?
Yeah, and I'd take a different slant on it and appreciate what Anders and Nick have said. I would even go one more step, is that we all talk about what is supply chain, and the question is really, where does it start, where does it end? So my definition is end-to-end supply chain that even backs up into commercialization and even in product development. So I think the biggest gap that we see in companies, number one, business systems in companies do not measure and track and provide the visibility that people need to know what to do, what the costs are, what are the volumes. I think the other thing that we're seeing in managing the supply chain is really being able to now in the future to do what I would call the what ifs. We're looking at driving down costs, but to me, it's really about cost realignment. We've just come out of the pandemic period where the new normal is going to be nothing like we've seen before. There's going to be continued what I would call volatility and risk, and I also think that as professionals in supply chain, we've now been recognized by mainstream that we're important to the business. I think we have the ability to now help businesses figure out what is the certainty, and through different tools and end-to-end supply chain visibility, cost tracking, being able to manage our providers with performance, I think puts us in a very important place in terms of how the economy runs and how we can help our companies.
Are you
Mike,
seeing your clients struggling with getting really cost transparency in regard to supply chain metrics?
I think what I would say, Heiner, and we're working with a bunch of Fortune 100 companies, but probably 15 businesses that we're involved in right now. And I would say, hands down, everyone's in what I would call a supply chain reset. And I didn't make up that term, but that's what's happening. Most companies are taking a look at how they were positioned and organized before the pandemic and realize that didn't serve them through the pandemic. And then coming out of it, the new normal, as I said, we're fraught with a bunch of things happening economically, with baby boomers retiring, with government debt, global political risk, climate change. None of us in our lifetimes or careers have ever had to face this. So I think what companies are doing is taking a step back and saying what's important to us and how do we take uncertainty out. So I'm seeing a lot of companies getting way better into integrated planning. If you think that you had poor planning and then you've got disruption, you're going to miss somewhere with too much inventory and not enough service. So I do see companies resetting. I think there is a view looking at technology. I think there's a view looking more at the organization. I see a lot of companies going to more wider supply chain where procurement's in there, manufacturing's in there. And I think there's some very good data that shows that a supply chain that's all encompassing actually can perform better because you have different integrations. So I think I see more effects on integration and more effects on better data analytics. And the last thing that I don't see enough of is, with all this uncertainty, is being able to do what ifs. We do a lot of network modeling, but the ability to do what ifs with all of the uncertainty, I think, needs to become a capability that companies have internally, or they work with a partner externally, because things are going to change. And when, as a supply chain head, or any of us in our roles, we need to know what that change is going to look like, so we can inform the organization. Because I'll tell you what, no one else in the organization will know that but us. So we have a great opportunity to come to the forefront with intelligence, data, assumptions, and inform the rest of the business.
Nick, you've built a practice on procurement where you're deploying pretty advanced strategies for large organizations and also government, right? How do you tackle the topic in regard to making sure your clients have visibility to supply chain costs?
So there's a couple of things. My tagline is the right deal with the right supplier, and the right deal can be many things. It can be buying cheap trinkets in China and shipping them across when they happen to have a chance. And basically, you have some inventory, and you dig on the inventory, and you probably have too much so you don't run out. And even if you do, it doesn't really matter. And that's sort of very tactical. You get a quid pro quo. And once the transaction's done, it's pretty much done. And then at the other end of the spectrum are the strategic alliances, like when Dell outsourced its returns processing to what is now FedEx, but was Genco at the time, a very strong niche player that just does returns, all kinds of returns. And they were really good. And they set the objective to work together to increase the speed at which returns were processed, to increase the amount that were repackaged sufficiently quickly to be resold, because electronics lose value very quickly, refurbish and resell, and then work out what had to be recycled and what they wanted to put on the bone pile for a while to salvage. So how they work together and what Genco brought to the table and what Dell brought to the table and how they work together, those are the complex deals. And there's a continuum between those two, and it depends what you're trying to achieve. So the right cost in a tactical relationship is, what's it going to take to get the order, pay it, and get it fulfilled, and then we'll take care of it from here. And then you get to the approved relationship, where you've worked with these guys before. You may have paper in place, and they've made some kind of promise about how quickly they're going to deliver and things like that. You get to the preferred relationship, where you say, we like these guys, we do business well together, we work well together, and we'll give you extra discounts, or we'll put in place not only industry best practice, but specific programs that'll make your business better, like an MRO vendor that'll put a warehouse inside your facility, and you'll only pay for what they give to your workers. You don't have to pay for the inventory. You don't have to pay for the shipping. You pay just as they take it. And then you get into standard outsourcing, where you're basically buying a service, like you're a call center and you're buying for each call. Well, the trouble is, you pay for every call. So if the incentive of the provider is to have as many calls as possible, your incentive is to get all calls resolved the first time properly. So we have a conflict of interest, and that's where you start moving to the more collaborative, when you're dealing with suppliers that you trust, and when the suppliers are dealing with customers that they trust, because this is very much a two-way street. So the costs then fall out of the working together. How much cost is necessary for us to achieve the service promise, and how do each one of the actors work to optimize that level of cost and create capabilities in the future? So cost is very much at that point a consequence of the strategic vision you have.
How that's very interesting and very insightful. Mike, where do you see other areas of cost saving opportunities in your clients' operations?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about tools and AI and very, high end technologies. And in our practice, we work for a number of private equity companies and their portfolio companies. But what I have to tell you, in many cases, it's in a DC operation. You'd be surprised or shocked at how many operations just don't have the fundamentals of really good leadership, of very good communication, of well stated KPIs, of proper equipment matching. And so it almost goes back to the beginning. And I think, we're believers in leaning out the DC. But in many cases, what we're seeing with just the labor shortage is the application of smart technology. So not everyone can afford a $30 million investment in a cube storage, but there are different ways to do it. So we're seeing it, Heiner, and it comes back to foundation. You can see it, and maybe I can relate it to even inventory. The management of inventory and the performance of inventory, and going back to planning. We're still seeing companies who aren't getting the right performance, aren't measuring correctly, or have the tools. And I think as something that's happened in globally, but also very specific to Canada, is our average cost per square foot of real estate's gone from, in the last few years, from $10 to 20 plus. So the cost of having extra inventory that you don't need is it used to be a very small detail. Now it makes a huge difference. And then when you throw on the cost of people, or the lack of people to move the inventory, so all these things I see are coming home to roost in a way that you need good integrated planning, you need good sound fundamental operations, whether you outsource or not. You want to make sure you have the right partner, as Nick said. And even on transportation, all of that's come around in what we call the new normal. There are still cost improvements, even at the most foundational level. And I think you need to start there, and then you can add on all of the other great technologies that are around. But down to basics of good integrated planning, good tools, good DC operations, and again, back to this whole visibility and some of the tools and like Orchestra that can help, is providing the management to be able to do this, report it, and reflect it. We just have a long way to go to get there, and still see those opportunities.
Do you still do a lot of center of gravity and network optimization exercises?
Yep, I mean we've been doing that for a long time. What's happened it's been interesting through COVID. Pre-COVID, there was a lot of rationalization in North America. How many DCs where? What if we did put a DC here? What took place through COVID and the push on e-com for omni-channel companies was now, where do we need to place inventory closer to the customer? So it created another node in the network, which added complexity, especially on management and inventory. The interesting part that for us that added the complexity was, if you now were a retailer and you added on a store with BOPIS, buy online, pick up in store, the store is actually now a network that you have to, a part of the network that you have to account for. So it's become more complicated. The addition of that store versus just a DC that was shipping regionally added a node. And again, for companies to manage that, it's managing inventory, having the visibility, and very few have that. So I think at the end of this whole cycle, what we found is most customers are over inventoried still. I think part of that was because it became more complicated, but also that they really threw some of the rules out with COVID with supply. So we're still getting through that. I mean, we're still on the other side of that, but network optimization is something that can really help companies figure out what they need to do. And in most cases, it's do I offset transportation, with DC location, with inventory deployment to better to service the customer and at least have those options. So in many cases, the work that we're doing is actually a business case, a number of scenarios that allows a company to go ahead and build DCs for the next 5 to 10 years. So it's something that a lot of companies should have the core competency as much as we provide it. But again, that comes with investment and tools and knowledge and leadership that says we need to have this in-house. So we're still seeing that. We're still going to see that. The one element that I would add to the uncertainty and some of the risks we're facing is the ability to do the what ifs on the back of network and even with tools similar to Orchestra, is if I change a supply point, if I added a DC here, if I change the mode, if I change my service, like this is stuff that you just don't do on a spreadsheet. You need to have the tools and know-how. So I think that's the next wave of things to come as we're seeing volatility in global crisis and just in the economy in general.
Yeah, Anders, you've been involved with a number of really very ambitious and sophisticated projects around achieving end-to-end cost visibility and all the way to landed cost.
Yeah.
Maybe share some of those experiences. Also, what kind of tools and methodologies can be deployed?
Well, I think the traceability and the ability to be able to scan a QR code or something on a product to know what's the direction of that product, right? Because today we take it for granted in e-commerce that a parcel arrive at your house, it has a barcode, has the shipper and their ship to. And the provider, of course, have the opportunity to use this barcode to do, change in direction or change of direction whilst in motion in the supply chain. Okay, and I think when you want to do a more of a warehouse operation, is to identify, does this need to arrive at the gate and be put away in the pallet shelf, on the pallet back in the shelf, only for today 2 days later to be picked up and brought out to ship out, right? So having a better understanding of front of the house of a warehouse operation, utilize cross-dock capabilities, identifying the need for speed for any kind of inbound movements, but know it before the truck arrives, because once the truck arrives, it's too much stress to deal with. But those are the things that, number one, more or less doubles the capacity of how much product you can handle with the same amount of workforce, and also takes massive cost out of the operation. Just as an example.
Yeah. So we all touched on it. The importance of technologies and tools to really help people out to get their arms around costs. What are some, starting with analytics and visualization, what are some of the sort of simple strategies companies can get going to get much more transparency of what's happening? Maybe Anders, you continue.
Okay, so look, the number one part is what I talked about before as well. Ensuring that you have data, ensuring that the data is accurate, that you're living a digital life, you're living and breathing the information that you're sharing. Because as supply chains are getting complex, we have companies that have more than 400,000 data point changes per day in their supply chain. And there's no human being who can manage that. So you need to be able to come up with the right set of tool that matches your operation. If it's a small operations, you can do this with smart Excel solutions. But if it becomes a little bit more complicated, you need to pick providers similar to Orchestra who can help you on those kind of journeys to normalize data, because normalization is the number one most important thing. And we spoke about it a little bit earlier before the call today. Master data is king. If you don't have proper master data, it doesn't matter what you do, because you don't know what you're dealing with. Okay, and what I've unfortunately been keep on seeing with companies is they have these massive multi-million-dollar ERP systems, but the dimension of the product is not there. The dimension of shipping cards are not there. So if you want to do a digital twin and plan ahead what if scenarios, and you don't have this information, it's literally impossible, because it's going to be inaccurate. So it's not going to work. And what happens in an organization when you try something and it doesn't work? See, I tried it, it doesn't work, so let's not do that again. Okay, so you have to make sure that you do the right preparation before you get going. And I think that's probably a good starting point. Sort out your data, and from there you can do magic.
Yeah,
Mike, you're helping companies a lot with the data topic. I know it's near and dear to your heart as well, right? The whole topic of master data. Without it, you can't do anything. How do you help customers?
Yeah, I would say over the last number of years, it's helping customers, the whole master data governance, the control of it, the quality of it, who inputs, who checks it, that needs to become a core competency for, I don't care who you are, that needs to become a core competency. Because as you flip ahead to AI and machine learning, I mean, think about it. If you don't have a good, solid base of information and data that represents the business and the products and all the things that you need to cube, like think about all the things that set up the master data in a business, that needs to be solid. So we're working with a number of companies on how do you create that, who's responsible for it. But again, I think, Hunter, the biggest thing is someone, and it's the supply chain, and we're seeing a lot more chief supply chain officers being brought into. So supply chain lead is now VP is now being brought into C-level. Is that someone's bringing a vision that says we cannot, here's the roadmap for the next 5 to 10 years. Master data governance needs to become our number one core competency. Whether we outsource, whether we have AI, whatever we do, that is a start. And I think in many cases, and again, it's just what we see on a day-to-day basis, a lot of companies do not have this figured out for a whole bunch of reasons. But as you say, companies have not had great implementation on ERPs, or they haven't put enough resources in, or put enough resources just get it in, and then the processes fall away. So I think what I would see is the discipline, and what we try and develop with our clients is the discipline and the rules around developing master data as a core competency, master data governance. I think, again, to me, it's very foundational, but it's something that as people are looking to these higher technologies and quicker, faster learning, that is a must. And there's different ways to get there, but it's the starting point.
Nick, how are some of the ways you work with your clients to get there in terms of having a sort of cohesive and coherent end-to-end master data management process and structure in place?
It's a real challenge, and it's a really, really, really expensive problem to fix. So data quality is accuracy, it's consistency, it's completeness, and it's validity. And if you have 90% on all of those, you still have 65% overall data quality, which is pretty lousy, and 90% is good. So that is good data quality. Average is pretty poor. So again, you cannot meet an expectation that has not been defined. So it's important to define what is your taxonomy. What are the words and grammar that will be used to express it? And how do you express any MROP? You can do it with 6 parameters, as long as you choose the 6 parameters properly, and you can define pretty much anything. But you have to have a very robust taxonomy that allows you to articulate that. Everybody has to speak the same language from item creation all the way through the use of that master data. So part of it is the format, the syntax, and who gets to change it. And the fundamental thing is, if you come across a problem, and you will come across problems because mistakes will be made, somebody has to care enough to fix it. And what happens is the guy who gets the mistake is way down the chain, and the guy who created the problem is way up the chain. And generally, this guy just fixes it and lets it go on, and the problem stays, and it goes on and on. So it's also about a data quality culture that is, we have to fix this not just now, but forevermore. So getting it right, and you know what, if you have millions of items in your database, trying to fix it becomes an absolutely enormous task. So define the data, fix it from day one, and then when you come across problems, go back and fix the ones that are still working, because half of those items don't turn every 10 years.
How do you check even the quality of the data? How do you know if data is good or is bad? Which sounds like a simple question, but it's a bit
Well,
data is data to some
it's
extent.
easy. It's easy to identify what is bad data. That's pretty easy. What is
Okay, how do you
difficult
do
is
this?
to correct it, because especially when you're looking at relational databases, you're looking at all kinds of hierarchies of data structures that you can't go in and fix it in that field or in that database. It needs to be with all the different dependencies. So that's why it needs to start in a good way, because once it's done, it's very difficult to fix.
Let's assume that we get to a level of reasonable quality of data. So what kind of tools and technologies can we deploy to really leverage this? And I'm not even talking at this stage of AI and machine learning, but so what are some of the basic tools to build on good data?
Well, I think
or Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Nick. I mean, I'll take a stab at just, there's companies have ERPs that have certain functionality. I think it's getting the most out of your business system that you're using, and then it crosses over to special functions and applications that you need to run supply chain. So again, you see this in different cases, whether it's across transportation, warehouse management, or planning. I think, you got to get, I think it starts with getting the base, back, you get the master data correct, you get your ERP working to a good degree. And then as part of the game plan, you've got functionality that either attaches on, and then you can use all the tools and reporting that comes out of it. So I go back to, Heiner, there needs to be a very strong vision. And usually this is where the CSCO comes in of, what is it that we need from the business in terms of reporting and tools, and then driving that down, and then developing the competencies. I think a lot of cases we find we go into a company and the capabilities needed to get to the next level aren't so clear. So sometimes it's helping define what those capabilities should be. That's right for the company in its growth pattern and in its budgetary capability too. It's a never-ending. You never end. You start. You add a piece in. It's continuous improvement with a game plan. I find there are very few businesses that are very buttoned down on a 5-year plan that relates to across the supply chain on overall performance, on overall capability build, which is building our people and the tools that are needed. I think, again, we can do a much better job of articulating that as supply chain leaders and influencing the rest of our organization.
Yeah, I think technology is actually not the problem. For the last decades, we've had faster, cheaper, and more power and more memory and more network capabilities and easier programming languages. And so technology will always be there to be able to do what we want it to do. We have to decide what we want the technology to do. So part of it is ERP and the installed base of all the technology that's being used. So data quality, and not only master data, also the transactional data, and just agreeing on something like what is a sale, because the salesman's idea of what a sale is, and the logistics guy's idea of what a sales is, and the finance guy's idea of what a sale is not necessarily the same thing. So just converging on actual real definitions, even of transactional data. So once you have clean data, and that's not a small problem, then what is it do you want to do with it? Because the more I think about AI is if you don't understand it and you don't understand how it arrived at the conclusion, what makes you think that brute force computing is going to give you a better answer than somebody who's actually thinking through what has to be done? So I think we're a long way away from humanity being killed by generative AI. I think there is a lot of scope left to working out what we want to do. And if we know what the right things are we want to achieve, we can work backwards to decide what it is that has to be done. And then we can start using technology to kill administrative tasks, to copy data, to verify data, to clean up data. We can use it to, for instance, Walmart Canada is now doing their freight invoicing on blockchain. So instead of it being Walmart Canada pre-calculating their invoices and the transporters calculating their invoices, they share the same data, and a smart contract calculates how much has to be paid. And you've just taken huge contention out of freight billing, which has been a nightmare from I first discovered it as so the it's really, really, really important to understand what it is you want to do. The technology will work it out. The technology is there. It may not be there today, but it's going to be there pretty soon, just because there's so much capability that continues to increase exponentially. It's really making out what is it you want to do? How do you want to get where you want to get? And then finding the technology that will work there. And there are lots of point solutions you can bring in to help you get a quick, good enough answer. And when you're secure that this is something you want to do all the time, then you can go out and get a robust solution that will do it in the background. But it really is understanding what it is you want to achieve.
That's very foundational. I fully agree, Nick. We have a good question here, actually. That it's an interesting one for you, Mike. Is gentlemen, with increased volatility, switching suppliers and rebuild/remodel supply chains becomes much more frequent operations than it used to be, let's say, 4 years ago. Most of the supply chain operations require complex deals and contracts. Any tips of streamlining this part of the supply chain remodeling?
Yeah, I'd like to take a crack at that. I think it does go back to having the tools, knowledge, and analytics, and some of the what ifs. And again, this is just doing it through a tool. That this is not, and it's understanding the implication of a change. So there's a long way to go from someone doing a model to actually implementing it. So I think this says a lot about the supply chain organization as an influencer, and I'd say leading the charge as they should in this regard. And the word agility has been around for a while, and this is where I think how fast you can act, how quick you can respond in an organized fashion has a lot to do with back to the leadership, the organization, the processes, and clarity of how this is going to happen. So I would say streamlining, the first part of the streamlining is knowing what you want to do through the different modeling. But then then the next side of it is that internally you need a very strong internal team. But then to me, it comes back to partners. You need to partner with companies that can be as agile as you. I don't care how big you are today, you can't do it alone. You need to work with your partners, whether they be 3PLs, whether they be consultants, whether they be solutions companies, whatever it is. That's how you come up with a solution. So the right choice of partner at the right cost, starting with a vision of how this gets done. But I think we are going to be forced to doing this in a faster cadence than we ever had before. And we have to explain to our organizations why it's necessary. So that's why I look at us as we're teachers to the organization. No one else understands this. And it's just that we do know the differences between modeling and knowing how to execute is very important. So, I could be a great modeler and a poor execution person. So I think having both, being able to do the modeling and being able to execute internally and with your partners with very clear instructions and metrics and all of that, that's how you would do that. And it's having that discipline again, back in vision.
Yeah, there's a follow-up question here, or actually two follow-up questions. Nick, those are good ones for you. I think modeling is one thing. I'm more talking about, say, I do a tender in the form of online auction. When the auction is done, it comes down to boiling down official contract. A small difference in opinion comes up, and the whole tender goes down. 2 to 3 weeks of work goes down the drain.
So just to take a current example, BC harbor workers are going to go on strike on the 24th of June. We have 10 days to work out what we're going to do about that. The ships are leaving the ports now. So you want to go through the Panama Canal? Capacity has just gone down by 20%. So if you're the big shipper, you may want to decide what you want to do by yourself and then tell the other guys what to do. If you're the little shipper and you really don't have the time to invest in understanding these issues and responding to them, maybe you want to work with a partner who is going to monitor this and who's going to take it into account and who's going to action appropriate redirection of your products or whatever is the appropriate task. So the nature of the deal is important. If you're buying a carrier who is going to blindly execute what you tell them to do, then that's what you're buying and that's what you'll get. And if you then expect them to be flexible and to have the additional capacity to handle your peaks, and they have the additional capability of monitoring everything that's happening and telling you what's coming down the line and what you should be doing to adapt, that's a different deal. And it takes a different level of management attention from the supplier. It takes a different level of capacity. So you're going to be paying additional money to keep that capacity on tap. And so the nature of the deal and what your expectations are and agreeing the expectations in the tender. Because if you're doing a reverse auction, you're saying, how cheap can I get it? And you're typically defining, I want you to pick it up, put it in a clean, safe truck, deliver it, and not be more than 2 hours late. And that's all I'm buying from you. So very, very tactical. So you can't expect strategic support from a tactical deal.
Yeah, I can give an example on this one. Many decades back, I was dealing with a customer that was buying a huge machine in Canada, and they wanted to bring it into England. And the term of trade was free to port in a Canadian port. But of course, they thought that it's going to be an East Coast port. What the customer then ended up coming up with, it was a Vancouver port. So you need to understand in going into a contract, what are the terms and conditions that you're actually closing in on before you get to the commercial end game. It's very important.
Yeah. JG, who has asked the question, I mean, you're happy to reach out to Nick or Mike or Anders or to any of us as a follow-up if there's anything else we can help you and assist to maybe support you in this process a bit more. There's an interesting follow-up question, Nick, in regard to your Walmart smart contract example, and MA is surprised that this hasn't been more of a catalyst to get the whole topic of blockchain and going. Is it the concrete question is, aside from associated with cryptocurrency, what is holding back wider adoption and we should be seeing after proof of concept with Walmart? So how, from your perspective, what's the reason why this hasn't been more of a catalyst?
Well, if you want to create a standardized solution, you have to have somebody who defines the standard and a community that accepts the standard.
Yeah.
So Walmart was able to do that. I don't know if the other transportation companies are thinking of adopting it. I don't know if the other retailers are thinking of adopting it. It would make sense. But again, there was a blockchain solution that was funded by IBM and
Maersk.
And they pulled the plug because they were sick and tired of spending money trying to create a standard that no one would adopt, because it was, well, you're my competition, I'm not going to. So data is neutral. Information is not. And if we can share the data, then what you do with that data and build into information and analysis is a whole different thing. I don't know enough about cryptocurrency. I don't trust the stuff because it's a bit of the Wild West. But to pick up on JG's question on what I'm suggesting requires loyalty, loyalty is deserved. And if you want to get into a collaborative, strategic relationship, you have to build trust. The supplier has to build trust. You have to have trust in each other, and that involves um, being open to being disappointed. So choose first to trust, deserve loyalty, and that's how a relationship can evolve into a strategic initiative. You rarely jump into bed on day one. You work together a bit and see how you respond and make sure that you have behaviors that are consistent and start working out how to align them.
Yeah, and I would add to that,
It
Nick.
depends very.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
was
go
just going
ahead,
to add
Mike.
to say there are picking your partners and having the right partner, having the right rules of engagement, transparency to me is something that is critical in these relationships. Um, open book relationships have been around for a long time, but I really think rules of engagements, figuring out what happens if we do have a conflict, what happens, really on some of these, and some of these have been around for a long time. I would say it is a rare commodity, but there are many successful partnerships where people have developed those trust and transparent relationships, and knowing what the expectation is from each other. I think that's back knowing what you want as a customer, as a shipper, is the most important thing. I think you literally have to. You can mold a provider if you know how to utilize them best, and it makes sense for them and they make money. So I've been able to do this in different past histories over quite a long time, but it takes the right partner, and it takes the right corporate culture, and in some cases that's not going to work due to corporate culture, and you could have a very trusting individual, but it gets overridden. So there's a lot of soft and hard skills that are needed to develop these type of relationships, but they're there.
It depends also very much on of the size of the shipper, right? So if you're a small to medium sized shipper, you need to concentrate your spend more on a fewer number of service providers to represent a more meaningful business to them, right? So if you're a small company and you try to keep 10 transport companies going, it's very difficult. On the surface, you're going to maximize price, but in reality, when something hits a snag, you're going to be out in the cold and not getting the support. So concentrate your spending power of as few people as necessary, and build meaningful relationships with those service providers, so they can help you out when times change, right?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, Heiner, and I think every business needs to figure out what is the core competency for us. What does that mean? What is it that we want to invest in? Must be controlled by us. Must have our people. And in many cases, you're finding a lot of you're seeing the emergence of 3PL services that were just managing a warehouse. Now it's managing inbound ocean freight. Now it's managing outbound transportation. So obviously, if you can find the right partner that can do more, you can leverage that. But again, it's back to what is it that we need to do that's core to us, and that drives the strategy.
Very good.
And I think
Very good.
that also, even if you're a big shipper and you have several transportation companies you work well with, you still have to give them a coherent scope to work with.
Yeah.
You can't kind of sand it around. And I see that being in a volatile situation, it's difficult to build trust. I don't think that's entirely true. Of course, it's challenging, but as Cialdini said, choose first to trust, and put in place the right governance of the relationship. So the right people are at the table when they have to be. And if there are things that destroy trust, address them immediately. what typically happens is we don't have appropriate governance. We have relatively junior people managing carriers, and they don't have the wherewithal to escalate and get the buying organization to behave properly.
Yeah.
So frequently, the issues are not necessarily on the supplier side, they're often also on the buyer side. So having the right people who are responsible for making sure that everyone behaves in a manner that will protect and build trust, you can start. Understand that, yes, you are exposing yourself, but the other guys are exposing themselves too. So nobody really has an interest in messing it up. So it's not an ideal situation, but COVID certainly never was an ideal situation.
No. But to your point, Nick, if you go through history and you look at all the different crises we've had, and companies, they on both sides, they remember the attitude of another provider, right? So you need to have that relationship, and I've seen that throughout my career, where really successful organizations, they do that really, really well. They deal with it responsibly. They take a hit when it's their time, and they expect the other one to take a hit when it's the other way. So when you build that trust over time, I think you get to a relationship with a set number of service providers that you can trust. And if that means you need to hook up with a provider that costs a little bit more than the cheapest, you're better off, because in the long run, when you look at it at the averages of a decade, it also ends up being the best deal. So I think it's important to really focus on that.
It's a give and take.
Money.
Yeah,
it's
it is.
the way you deal with the relationship. It's the people in your organization and how they deal. Story against story against story is how they customers treated their suppliers. The suppliers stepped in and helped them even when they weren't the highest paying and whatever, just because the human connection made it durable.
Yeah, and I think one of the we're working with a large multinational company, a big transformation project, and the leader made a statement a couple of weeks ago that it is a business to a business, but it's people to people. It is as a service provider and as a consultant, and Nick would know this, and all of us would know that you're dealing with the trust of an individual that's your sponsor, and you have to do your best to make sure that works, and you've got transparency. And at the end, on the flip side, you have to do some decent risk mitigation. I mean, not everything you do is going to be 100%. So if and especially as we're going into this more volatility and uncertainty, that we know if we kind of manage our risk in some of the decisions we do. For instance, you don't outsource everything all at once. If that's to your partner, you can do pieces at a time to prove over time that it works. So there are different strategies in being able to circumvent all the things that we're facing. And again, it's a people to people relationship, not so much a company to company.
And the
very good, Mike.
Management is a very, very good discipline. Sitting down with your supplier and saying, here are the risks we see, and how are we going to manage them together, and how are we going to mitigate them, and what are we going to do about the residual risk? And doing that together, it brings great clarity, and it really sets the expectation on who's responsible for what, which is not necessarily obvious in the contract. It's as you work through issue by issue, you start to sort out who's responsible for it, who's the best person to take care of it. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah, the relationships get tested pretty strongly once the first problem.
One thing that also came across me with a company I was talking to, they had a long-term deal with a raw material vendor. And of course, as the prices went up on the raw material, the customer on the other side for the finished good, he didn't want to negotiate because he also had a long-term contract, and that was a longer-term contract on the raw material. So how do you deal with that, right? You go to the customer who's buying your product saying, look, I have to stop servicing you, or you have to pay more, and that is, I think something you can't resolve without having a good relationship with your partners.
Yeah. So in the mining,
amazing.
they pass that through. but not every industry has that.
Right.
So, guys, thank you so much. Let's wrap things up. Let me try to summarize what I heard is from everyone basically. Saving money and improving efficiency of supply chain is not necessarily only a procurement exercise, for sure not. It's partnership. It's looking at your operations. Many times it's making sure that your basic clean operational processes, so blocking and tackling processes, are in place to make sure you have a smooth operation and you can operate really efficiently. Another big point which was raised by both Nick and you, Mike, is clearly understand what it is you actually want to try to achieve. Don't just start racing ahead and trying to move forward, but plan your journey and very meticulous set out the course that you're trying to take and then measure as you go forward. Data is a huge topic to drive a supply chain efficiency and effectiveness. It all starts with master data. Measure your data, know how good your data is, and then put basic strategies in place to improve that and continue to measure and provide visibility to your entire organization in terms of what it is you're achieving on an overall strategic level as it pertains to supply chain, but also in a tactical level, and also if necessary on a shipment by shipment level or transaction by transaction level. Nick, you made that very good point. And finally, I think the hugely important point is partner with your service providers. Make sure you select the right partners. Make sure you don't drive to the lowest price, and make sure that when you need help, that your partner is there to not only collaborate with you and find solutions, but also sometimes, as Anders takes, sometimes one party has to take a hit and another party has to take a hit. So thank you so much, guys, for joining. It was a very good session. I hope the audience enjoyed it. We've had a few really good questions, and until next time, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Have a good one.